Welcome to the online classroom for the module RSK4803, Risk Financing. As you remember, we said that if you have been going through the other classes, like for RSK 4801, 4805, 4802, and so forth, for the UNISA postgrad modules, we essentially have five. We have five RSK modules, which start from RSK 4801, 02, 03, and 04 up to 05. So there are five RSK modules. And each of these RSK modules focuses on a specific area of risk management. RSK 4801 focuses on operational risk management. 02 focuses on risk governance and compliance issues. 03 is the one we are looking at now, the first lesson. It's known as risk financing. 04 focuses on credit risk management, and 05 focuses on market risk management. So this is going to be the first class focusing on RSK 4803, in particular, risk financing. Now, risk financing is an important part of risk management. And what risk financing does, it looks at all of the different methods or approaches that are used to pay for losses when they occur. So it's got a number of components to it. It's part of the risk management cycle. It follows on after risks have been identified, and is part of the process of implementing the most appropriate techniques for handling the financial consequences of risk exposure. So you'll see as we go through this module that risk financing can be classified into two main categories, namely risk retention, where an organization will choose to keep all or part of the financial consequences of their risk, and the organization will use approaches such as self-insurance, captive insurance companies. We'll talk about those, or they just decide to accept certain losses as a cost of doing business. So that's one approach of risk financing strategies. The other is risk transfer. We will look at alternative risk transfer and other issues. This is when the organization actually decides to take the financial losses that might arise from the risk to another party, and they can do this through insurance, through contractual transfers, hedging, or even using alternative risk transfer approaches and derivatives. So when you look at risk financing, the key goal of an organization is to try to minimize the long-term cost of any risks they're exposed to, whilst making sure that they have enough money, enough funds available to pay for losses when they happen, or enough funds available to make sure that the operations of the organization can continue with financial stability should particular risks occur. So if you actually look at this particular module, we have a number of topics that the module will actually cover. There are actually a number of topics that the module will cover. So the first topic is actually risk management, the first learning unit of which we're going to look at in this class. So topic one is risk management. Then topic two will focus on decision theory. Topic three will look at risk financing concepts. Topic four will look at risk financing, in particular looking at risk retention, which is one of the types of risk financing I told you about. Then we'll also look at risk transfer, in particular insurance. And then we'll finish off with insurance-linked securities, which is alternative risk transfer. So that will actually be topic six. So we can actually look at it this way. We're going to have topic 4, and then topic 5 and 6. Topic 5 and 6 will look at risk transfer, traditional risk transfer, which is insurance, and alternative risk transfer, which is topic 6. Topic 4 will look at risk retention. whereby a company or an organization will choose to actually retain risk within the organization. Topic 3 will just look at risk financing concepts, like different risk financing concepts, which is just general issues to do with uh, risk financing concepts. That's topic 3. Topic 1, of course, is just an overview of risk management, and then topic 2 is decision theory, decision theory. Yeah. So topic 2 is decision theory. Topic 3 is just risk financing. Topic 1, risk management. So topic 4, remember we said that risk financing can be split. Risk financing can be split into risk retention and risk transfer. So it's if you consider this module like that, it becomes a relatively a bit easier module to follow if you just have a mind map as to how the module goes. So today we're going to look at study unit 1, lessons not learned in the past with regards to risk management, and also why risk financing is important. Then in the next classes, we'll look at enterprise risk management, then capital in enterprises. Then we'll move on to topic 2, which is decision theory. Topic 3, which is risk financing concepts. Then we'll finish off by looking at risk retention and risk transfer in detail. So this module is a bit unique in that it doesn't have a study guide, so to say. Like what you do, you get a number of articles that you need to go through. You get a number of articles that you need to go through, and those articles essentially focus on the learning outcomes. So what I've done, these are really long articles. What I've done, I will go through each of the articles, and then when I go through each of the articles, what I do is I summarize the notes for you and also just put the references. So if you have time, you can also just go through each of the articles, but I try to summarize everything for you to what's important so that you save time. And I focus on the learning outcomes using the articles as examples, just to make it all easier for you, because these are very, very long articles, which can take a lot of time, but I do go through them. So what I would advise is that as I go through my notes with my references to the specific articles I'm referring to in the examples, explaining the key learning outcomes, you can also go through the articles if you want and you have time, but I try to be as thorough as possible in my notes. So you'll notice that for the entire topic, these are all the learning outcomes. For learning unit 1, you need to cover the first 4 learning outcomes, but you'll see that maybe in the second learning unit, you need to cover maybe the next 10 and everything. So we'll go through it like that. So the first study unit 1, which is lessons not learned, is what I'm going to cover. And then we will finish off the learning units and then continue that way. Okay, so a key thing to understand with regards to risk financing is that you tend to find that there are 2 types of companies. There are 2 types of companies or organizations. They can even be public organizations, not necessarily companies like parastatals. There are 2 types of organizations, right? There are organizations which tend to survive risk events. There are certain organizations which seem to survive certain risk events, and then there are certain organizations that tend not to survive. There are certain organizations that tend not to survive risk events. In this case, we're looking at firm-specific risk events. Okay. Like you might see that an organization might have a huge fraud scandal, there might be a fire, there might be food poisoning, their IT system might go down. Some organizations, there might be corruption or other issues. Some organizations tend to survive those risk events, whereas other organizations tend not to survive those events, right? And you tend to see that organizations that tend to survive are organizations that have good risk management strategies in place, and also organizations that have good risk financing systems. In other words, what usually happens when an organization experiences a risk event, the organization usually requires funds or money to try to mitigate the losses that come from the risk event. Organizations that tend to survive tend to be organizations that have good risk financing strategies, such that they have enough funds to be able to help to cope with losses that arise as a result of the risk event. This could be due to insurance payments, maybe if there's a fire. It could be due to self-retention, having a captive insurance company, setting money aside, all of those issues. Of course, we always try to mitigate, to try to prevent the risk happening as much as possible, to mitigate it using operational risk management, using good risk governance structures. But unfortunately, sometimes risks do arise, and then we need money to help us to deal with the losses from the risk. That's when risk financing comes into play. So organizations that tend to survive are organizations that tend to have good risk financing systems and tend to have enough funds set aside to be able to mitigate losses associated with those funds. Organizations that tend not to survive some of these events are organizations that don't focus on risk financing, organizations with poor risk financing systems. In other words, organizations that don't have risk transfer like insurance, derivatives. They also don't have any risk retention mechanisms. So when losses and risk events happen, and there are financial issues, they tend not to have any money set aside to help with those issues. They can try to go to the financial markets, maybe to borrow, maybe to get loans, but usually risk events usually leave a company in a bad position operationally. So getting loans and other sources of capital can prove very difficult, especially when you've had a fire or you are experiencing litigation. A lot of providers of capital will not want to be associated with that company because its future prospects might be dire. Whereas if you have risk financing systems in place, you'll just take money that you have been setting aside, or money from the insurance, money from alternative risk transfer, money from risk retention mechanisms. You'll take that money to help you with these risk events. That's why risk financing is really important, right? So we're just going to look at some of the lessons which were not learned by certain businesses that didn't have appropriate risk financing systems within the organization, and why those businesses sometimes had risk management failures as a result of having poor risk financing systems and so forth. We'll also talk about the roles and responsibility of risk management and top executive management when it comes to risk financing. We'll evaluate the alternatives that enterprises can consider to prepare for a future crisis, some of which I was just explaining. Then we'll talk about the very popular acronym VUCA, VUCA, and how that relates to risk financing. So like I said, there are a number of articles you need to read. One article covering Eskom and its issues, another article covering the HIH collapse, which was an Australian insurer, another article covering Kome, a subsidiary of Delta Airlines. They had an IT incident. We'll also look at risk management failures. What are they and why do they happen? By R. Stultz from the Journal of Applied Corporate Finance. And then we'll talk about VUCA, right? Which was published by Bennett and James Lemoyne 2014, Understanding the Threats to Performance in a VUCA World. So what I'm saying, these are very long articles. So what I'm essentially going to be doing, I'm just going to be taking you through some of the important concepts from the articles. with regards to the learning objectives. And then you can also just go through the articles again in detail if you want and you have time. So the key thing that you first need to understand, like I've said from the learning module outcomes, is comparing the roles and responsibilities of risk management and top executive management when it comes to the concepts we're talking about with regards to risk management and risk finance. So it's important, of course, to distinguish between risk management and executive management, um, and the relationship between the two when it comes to managing the risks within an organization and the long-term sustainability of the organization, right? Whilst risk management by itself and executive management have distinct responsibilities, they all have an important role when it comes to looking at the total risk management framework within an organization. So you need to be able to understand what the responsibility of risk management alone is and what the responsibility of executive management alone is and how those two integrate in the context of risk management. When we look at the risk management's role, management's functions are primarily to identify risks within an organization, assessing these risks, trying to assess the likely impact of these risks, coming up with ways to mitigate these risks, which would come to that part we were referring to, which is closely related to risk financing, monitoring the risks that could impact an organization's ability to achieve its objectives, and then reviewing that process consistently, identifying, assessing, mitigating, and monitoring risks. So that's what risk management's role is. And then, according to the Barings Bank case study, so hopefully you read the Barings Bank case study. Barings Bank was one of the oldest banks in the United Kingdom, and it collapsed in 1995 due to one of their traders who was called Nick Leeson. I think it's article number 2. This was due to a trader called Nick Leeson, who did some unauthorized and speculative trading. So it was actually quite an old bank. And then what Leeson did, he began to do some unauthorized trading, betting on certain stock markets, and he kept his losses in a secret account that wasn't detected by Barings Bank. The trades he was doing actually ended up going wrong, especially when some of the markets he was betting on had issues that happened to them that made a lot of losses. The unauthorized speculative trading he was doing actually ended up in significant losses of up to about 850 million pounds. And the bank was declared insolvent on February 26. And then Nick Leeson was arrested for fraud and sentenced to prison in Singapore. So the bank collapsed, and it was a result of massive risk management failures and internal controls. And it's one of the examples of how rogue trading can significantly impact a bank. So that case study, if you read that article, we actually see from that article that effective risk management also involves development and implementation of comprehensive risk frameworks that capture both financial and non-financial risks. These were not available at Barings Bank. You need consistent monitoring activities against established risk parameters. This individual, Nick Leeson, there wasn't a lot of monitoring on him. He was given a lot of freedom to do what he wanted to do without without oversight, right? So that was a key issue. And then we also learned that maintenance of independent oversight to ensure objectivity in risk assessment. There wasn't a lot of independent oversight with regards to him. Uh, and also regular reporting of risk exposure to executive leadership. So this is actually highlighted in another article. This last part, the regular reporting part, is actually highlighted in an article by Greener. Okay, there's the one by Bennett. Then this one is by Stultz. I think it would be the Comey example that would be highlighted by Greener. No, the one on Barings Bank is actually the one that's highlighted by Greener, right? Yeah. So it's actually the same article that talks about the Barings Bank example. So Liam Neeson, even the people who were above him, they didn't fully understand the risks he was taking on or what was happening. So that actually also led to significant losses. So this is just an example of the dangers that can occur if you don't have effective risk management. We also have another example that also illustrates the importance of risk management, and that's actually spoken about in article number 3, the collapse of HIH. And if we actually look at HIH in this particular case, HIH was actually a major Australian insurance company. And then this company had one of the largest corporate failures in Australian history. The company was founded in 1968. It offered public liability, professional indemnity insurance, whereby professionals like doctors or lawyers could take out insurance. Then, if they made mistakes in their practice, the insurance would pay out for any litigation issues. So it was a huge insurance company. And then what they did, they were significantly underpricing the insurance policies to gain market share. In other words, where insurance companies would charge a premium of, let's say, for example, 2,000 Rand per month, they would charge 500 Rand per month, and they would get a lot of clients. But the problem with insurance is that when people pay premiums, you need to set aside reserves such that when claims arise, you can meet these reserves. So they were actually not keeping sufficient reserves. These days, there's a lot of regulation, like insurance companies that are constantly monitored to make sure they keep adequate reserves. And it came up as a result of some of these issues. And then the company also made a lot of poor investment and acquisition decisions, like purchasing other insurance companies which were in a weak position and so forth. And this further weakened their financial position. And then in 2001, the company collapsed with massive debt. And it actually meant that a lot of policyholders were actually left without coverage after having paid policies for a significant amount of time. And then there were investigations and afterwards, but a lot of people lost their jobs. Policyholders had no cover. There was a lot of lack of confidence in the insurance industry. And this was all of a result of poor risk management. So the HIH collapse illustrates how ineffective risk management can lead to catastrophic outcomes. There was poor risk management in Barings Bank, poor risk management in HIH. And the Royal Commission that occurred with regards to HIH found that the company lacked clearly defined limits on authority of the chief executive, resulting in a system that was out of control and a board that did not appreciate it. So risk management can help to avoid some of these disasters that have happened in the past and which are discussed in some of those articles. And then what's the role of the executive and top management? The executive and top management, with regards to risk management, they set a more strategic long-term view with regards to risk management. For example, they are responsible for the strategic decisions within the organization. And with regards to risk appetite, they also set the risk appetite. They are responsible for establishing a robust governance structure, which is covered in RSK4802, and making sure that the organization has appropriate risk management structures in place. They are also responsible for creating a culture that values risk awareness and ethical decision making. They are responsible for allocating sufficient resources to the risk management functions within the organization, and they are also responsible for reviewing and responding to risk management findings. So we also have an article here, the first article, which looks at the ESCOM case study, where there's a lot of negative publicity with regards to ESCOM. I'm sure you know about that. And people always talk about the financial crisis around ESCOM, and how it's got a lot of financial issues leading to the load shedding issues and other corruption accusations and so forth. So we are really familiar with that. But if you want to go into detail, you can also just look at this article. But this is something that's covered in the news a lot with regards to ESCOM and the situations there. If you look at the ESCOM case study, you actually find that there's been a lot of failure with regards to what executive and top management is responsible for in the past. Because those top executive leadership failures have led to financial distress. And this report, this parliamentary report, actually came up with certain conclusions that stated that executives could take risks with regard to large-scale investments and not bear the full consequences of those risks, creating a situation of moral hazard. Right, so we have this unique situation that occurs sometimes. It's a concept that's usually talked about in insurance, which we describe as moral hazard. Moral hazard is essentially when you take out an insurance policy and then you tend to be relaxed about the event that you're insured for happening, right? You tend to, let's say you have car insurance and you've been paying it for some time. Then you say, because I have car insurance, I can leave my car unlocked, or I can just park it in a risky place. I know that my insurance will still pay anyway, so I'm covered. So that's an example of a moral hazard where you become less likely to manage risk, or less likely to be, you take on risk-taking behavior knowing that you've got something covering you. So I think in the case of the ESCOM leadership, they sort of had, remember that example that I gave where I said we've got organizations which are in the public area and private area. With regards to organizations which are like companies, they tend to not have usually companies can't bank on the government to bail them out. ESCOM, on the other hand, and a lot of parastatals, they tend not to take risk management seriously because they always believe that the government will bail us out. So that's a form of moral hazard. So you can find executives within a parastatal like ESCOM or other parastatals not being very prudent or proactive with regards to managing risk, knowing that there's always someone to bail them out when things get bad. And ESCOM has received a lot of financing from the government due to some decisions, bad decisions, or business bad failures in investments that have occurred as a result of executive leadership, where executive leadership always believes the government will always bail us out because electricity is a key part of any economy. Whereas with companies that are not that are like in the private space, they tend not to have the government to bail them out. If they don't have proper risk financing and risk management frameworks, it can cause serious disasters leading to significant failures. So those executives tend to really consider risk management as a key part. So that's one of the key areas to look at when we talk about the roles and responsibilities of risk management and top executive management, and determining some types of risk management failures, which we will look at in detail. So you can always go through the self-assessments afterwards if you just want to, if you've got time and you just want to go through the articles. Yeah. You also need to remember that there's a key distinction sometimes between the risk management perspective and the executive management perspective. And there are usually tensions that can arise sometimes when the executive management perspective takes a precedence over the risk management perspective. The risk management perspective tends to focus on potential downside risks. It's got a conservative approach to business activities. It emphasizes controls and limitations, and it looks at long-term risk horizons. Whereas looking at the executive management perspective without considering risk management, executives tend to focus on growth and opportunity. Uh, Executives also tend to have an entrepreneurial approach to market opportunities, especially they just focus on the entrepreneurial side of a business, sometimes ignoring the risk management side, some executive perspectives. But we should try to integrate the executive management perspective and the risk management perspective. They also tend to have an emphasis on innovation and expansion and the pressure for short-term results. Whereas more and more, we want executives to include to consider and include the risk management perspective when they are actually making decisions, because these two can sometimes clash. So it's better to integrate them such that the right decisions are made for the organization. So we can actually see some of the tensions that occurred between the risk management perspective and the executive management perspective with regards to the Barings Bank collapse, whereby there were risk warnings. There were risk warnings. There was a risk management perspective where there were risk warnings with regards to what Nick Leeson was doing. But the executive management perspective of trying to get profits and growth, Nick Leeson seemed to be performing well initially and there were profits, but then he became riskier and riskier in his trades. And he was given carte blanche and freedom to continue with his trades because the executive management perspective in this case focused on the profits he was generated and not the risks he was taking on. And Greener actually notes in the article on Barings Bank that Barings executives' lack of interest in confronting Leeson, their lack of interest in the risk management perspective, allowed him to speak for them in his dealings with both internal and external auditors. So there was an emphasis on the executive management perspective rather than the risk management perspective, which also led to that significant failure in Barings Bank. It's quite interesting. It's also important to know the different types of risk management failures. Usually, we have several categories into which risk management failures can occur. We have what we call structural failures. We also have operational failures, cultural failures, strategic failures. All of these failures can be found in some of our case studies. For example, in the case study by Alan on the HIH, that insurance company collapse, we had inadequate governance frameworks. This was a structural failure. At Barings Bank, we had poor organizational design because Leeson had no accountability. So the organizational design of the company was quite something else. Right. There was also insufficient independence at HIH Insurance, right? Yeah, there were no independent non-executive directors on the board. Now there's a push to get independent directors, right? They tend to balance the other executives on the board and keep them accountable with regards to the structures of the board of directors. This is covered a lot in the module on risk governance. Operational failures, these are talked a lot about in the operational risk management book, module, sorry, Rsk4801. These include inadequate risk identification, such as the example in the ESCOM case study, poor implementation of controls in the Barings example, where the auditor didn't conduct any evaluation or testing of the operations, policies, procedures of internal audit despite their own manual requiring it. Also, data reporting deficiencies, such as what occurred in the HIH insurance scandal that occurred, right? We also have, so we're just talking about the different types of risk management failures. There's also cultural failures where there can be an incentive misalignment. You look at the HIH scandal that one of Anderson's partners stated that if he was called upon to exercise independent and professional skepticism by resisting management proposals, it would have adversely affected his ability to promote the supply of non-audit services to HIH. I think this was a case whereby an auditor actually was providing certain services. Let me just double check with regards to Anderson's position within HIH. Okay, what actually happened in this case is that Anderson was actually a major accounting firm that was providing audit services to HIH, and then they were also providing non-audit services, so like consulting and other advisory services. So already there was some form of conflict of interest there, because if you're providing audit services, which are required to be independent, and then you're also providing consultancy services, you are providing private business to the company. You might want to paint the company into a positive light as much as possible because they also give you private business, whereas the audit business is actually independent verification. So in this case, uh, we were told that if he was called upon to exercise independent and professional skepticism by resisting management proposals, let's say Anderson had really tried to be strict in actually assessing HIH properly. It means that they would have affected their consultancy services to HIH, in that HIH might have then decided to cancel certain private contracts they had for non-audit services. So that was an incentive misalignment under cultural failures. We also had risk-aware deficiency in Eskom. We are told that managers could pass on inefficiency costs to the consumer without sufficient accountability. This was also a form of moral hazard, where Eskom had this thing that the government will always bail us if things happen badly. We can also just raise utility prices to the consumer. Consumers will always need electricity. And then there was also information filtering at HIH, such that in occasions, bad news only reached the board if it couldn't be avoided. If there was bad news and it could be avoided, it wasn't passed on to the board of directors, which is not good. Strategic failures are also an example of a risk management failure, such as misalignment with business strategy. We see this in the example of Eskom, where the investment decisions were disconnected from realistic assessments of electricity demand. We've got inadequate horizon scanning, where HIH's decision to re-enter the US market was premised purely on limited evidence rather than earlier strategic decisions. And then also poor crisis preparedness in the case of Barings Bank, whereby they didn't have any risk financing plans with regards to the trading losses that occurred. So that's the key part you need to be familiar with regards to understanding the different types of risk management failures. Okay. So, having looked at all of these different types of failures from the articles and the case studies, how can an organization actually prepare for these potential future crises? Having looked at all of those failures. So, the articles tell us a number of ways of preparing for future crises for organizations. We are told that we can strengthen governance structures. In Alan, with regards to the HIH issue, we are told that we should try to include independent board oversight, right? You actually find that after the HIH collapse, a lot of insurance companies listed in certain jurisdictions now require chief executive officers and chief financial officers of listed companies to declare the annual reports and the financial report to actually declare that the annual report and the financial records have been properly maintained. So these are some of the requirements that have actually come up. There's also been a push to ensure independence of control functions post the HIH, this insurance company's issue. We got that no more than one former ex-partner of an external auditor can be appointed to directorship or senior management of a former audit client, because there's a lot of conflict of interest there, right? There's a lot of conflict of interest there. Because what could happen here is that if an ex-partner of an external auditor actually becomes part of the senior management of a former audit client, there's a chance that there might be a conflict of interest with regards to the new position in directorship of that former auditor, especially undue pressure they might put on their ex-partners who are part of the business that's currently maybe auditing the company. And if you're a former ex-partner and you know you might join senior management of an audit client, again, you might be more biased to just point a positive view of the company you're auditing. From Eskom, with regards to governance structures, there were recommendations from the parliamentary report that there needs to be clear accountability established, such that individual liability under the Corporations Act is now determined on the basis of a function rather than on title or position, right? This is more in case with the HIH example. This is quoted from the HIH example, but it can also apply with regards to the Eskom crisis. It can also apply with regards to the Eskom crisis, whereby in both cases we can require individual liability rather than on the basis of function. No, we say that individual liability under the Corporations Act is now determined on the basis of function rather than title or position. What this means is that in the past, like when there was failure in a company, usually the failure would just be attributed to maybe it was the CEO's fault or the CFO's fault, or someone with a particular title. That's how issues used to be accounted for, like liability. It used to be an individual. However, the Corporations Act actually moved rather to assigning liability to actual functions, right? To actual functions within an organization, such that if there's a failure, it's not attributed to a particular person, it's attributed to the whole financial management function, so that a lot more people are accountable, right? So that a lot of more people are accountable. So under this new approach, liability is actually determined by the actual functions an individual performs within the company, regardless of their official title or position. I think how this also helps is that you can't pinpoint responsibility on an individual, because sometimes that individual actually is not responsible for the function where the issue occurred. Rather, responsibilities are assigned by functions. So, for example, if an individual performs a role or a function that involves decision making, oversight, and control of a particular area, for example, financial reporting, compliance, and risk management, that individual who is responsible for that function can be held liable for failures or misconduct in that area, even if they don't hold a formal title related to it. I think that's the better way to look at it. So you might be working for a company, but you are not the CEO or the CFO, but you have specific responsibilities such that you are responsible for decision making, oversight, or control for a particular area with regards to financial reporting. If there's a failure there, you are accountable, right? In the past, it just used to be the CEO and the CFO, but sometimes some people have these roles in a business, then responsibility is delegated to someone else who gets paid a lot of money for that. So if there's a failure, we don't look at the title of a person anymore. We look at rather the functional responsible, who was responsible functionally for that. So it ensures that individuals who wield significant influence or control over corporate activities can't escape liability just because they don't have a formal title or position, even though they are getting paid a lot of money and they are actually responsible. So that's where this issue of establishing clear accountability comes from, and it was discussed in Ireland. So it even applies in the cases of ESCOM also. Then we also need to develop integrated risk management approaches. This is where enterprise risk management comes into place. We will discuss this in detail later. You need to implement enterprise risk management in the organization. You need to conduct scenario planning and stress testing. We're going to talk about all of these in detail. And you need to ensure risk quantification and aggregation. So these are all issues that are going to be covered in detail in later units. You also need to to build crisis management capabilities, such as developing risk response protocols, creating dedicated crisis management teams, conducting regular crisis simulations. A lot of these concepts are also talked about in the RSK4801 module. You also need to foster a risk intelligent culture. This is talked about in Allen for the HRH scandal, whereby certain reforms require performance targets for directors to be disclosed and discussed at shareholder meetings, such that that executive perspective of just focusing on profits isn't considered above a risk management perspective. With regards to a risk intelligent culture, we also need to promote transparency. Whistleblower protection has been introduced and designed to encourage employees to report suspected breaches. This is discussed in Allen. Also develop risk awareness training, ensuring all employees understand their role in risk management. And then we also need to leverage technology analytics, implement early warning systems, deploying technology to identify emerging risks, using data analysis for risk assessment, applying advanced analytics to detect patterns and anomalies, automate routine risk monitoring, free up risk management resources for strategic analysis. So these are all just issues that are covered in some of these articles with regards to how to actually help with issues. I think most of those articles to do with IT systems can maybe be mostly explained through the Come disaster, where there was an IT incident on 24 December 2004, where Come is a subsidiary of Dell. So what actually happened with the Come disaster? It happened in 2004, in that it was a major operational failure, which happened because of a failure in the crew scheduling system of the company. It led to a cancellation of almost all Come flights, and you see it happened around 24 December, which is during the festive season, and it was really significant, right? So there was a software glitch, and the crew scheduling system was unable to assign crews to flights. It led to a lot of flight cancellations. The root cause was a combination of factors. There were software limitations due to excessively high volumes during December. They also didn't have a backup system or a manual process in place to handle crew scheduling in the event of a system failure. They also hadn't tested the system adequately. And it led to passenger disruption, significant financial losses due to refunds, rebookings, and compensations. They also had to restore the system, which cost a lot of money. It also led to a lot of operational challenges. A number of lessons were learned, such as disaster recovery planning, better communication to customers by airlines, scalability and testing of systems to see when are systems scalable, when volumes increase, can systems actually handle that? So this failure just showed the importance of system reliability and risk management, like we keep talking about, and also focusing on customers. So when we're talking about some of these preparing for future crises approaches, we're also considering some of those issues. Right. The last concept you need to be familiar with is the VUCA or VUCA framework. This is discussed in the final article in the chapter by R. Stoltz, it's actually Bennett and James Lemoyne. What a difference a world makes, understanding the threats to performance in a VUCA world. So the VUCA article is an important article which actually says that if we look at the environment that any organization faces, the environment has volatility, it's got uncertainty, which is the U. It's also got complexity, which is the C, and it also has ambiguity, which is the A. So the environment in which a business operates is exposed to these four elements, which are known as VUCA, and they are parts of the risk environment that an organization is faced with. So an organization can try to understand its risks based on this VUCA framework, whereby if we consider volatility, this just refers to how quickly things change in the environment in which the business operates. So a lot of businesses operate in environments with volatility, like shifts in market conditions, technology, and competitive landscapes. As an example, from the case studies we looked at, Eskom is exposed to a lot of volatility through changes in coal prices and electricity demand. And this can really negatively affect planning. It's difficult to plan. So it can lead to a lot of financial instability within the business. We also have businesses exposed to a lot of uncertainty. This describes the lack of predictability in issues and events. Organizations face increasing difficulty in forecasting outcomes with confidence due to a lot of uncertainty that comes with issues and events. We see this in the case of HIH, that insurance company. There was a lot of uncertainty as management operated with inadequate information systems that left a lot to be desired. And executives were often flying blind with not enough information. Remember, we did say at HIH, bad news wasn't communicated to the top board unless it really had to, which was a problem. So there was a lot of uncertainty with regards to the true financial position of the insurance company, which led to a lot of collapse. There's also a lot of complexity that businesses are exposed to, especially with globalization and interdependencies. A business might be located in Hong Kong, but it might be interconnected and dependent on operations in South Africa or Australia. And something that happens in one of those countries can greatly affect the business in Hong Kong. We saw that during COVID-19 with supply chain disruptions. There was a lot of, it made us appreciate interconnectedness and interdependence. There are usually these cause and effect relationships that are difficult to discern unless something has actually happened. There's that COVID example I gave. We can also look at the case studies with the Barings Bank collapse. It illustrated complexity through intricate global trading arrangements that Nick Leeson exploited. His social network stretched across the globe, creating a situation where oversight became virtually impossible. Complexity can even be seen in the Comey issue, whereby the failure of a flight in US, like all those flights, I'm sure it affected in connecting flights, whereby passengers couldn't connect to flights of other airlines. Those airlines maybe had to to help their customers and communicate what was happening. The system was complex, it wasn't fully understood, but usually this refers to interconnectedness. Also, ambiguity is the final part of the VUCA. This describes the haziness of reality and mixed meanings of conditions where misinterpretations and misunderstandings can proliferate. So there's always some haziness with regards to information and what things are actually happening given what's actually being said. There was a lot of ambiguity in HIH, that insurance company, with regards to accounting practices, which became a repository of the unpleasant, with questionable transactions giving rise to doubtful accounting areas, which disguised the seriousness of the situation. In other words, I think it's where reality isn't communicated well. Like there isn't. Companies operate in an environment where sometimes you're not given information as clearly as you should, and you can't really assess situations as they are. So the VUCA framework, as discussed in that last paper, it's got profound implications in how organizations approach risk management. To account for volatility, what a business can do, you can try to build excess capacity such that when key items you need to operate in business, there are shortages with regards to those things. Maybe you have a storage of them. You can also come up with creative ideas and other resources to try to absorb rapid change. Are you able to handle new business strain? If you expand into a particular geographical area and demand goes up, can you handle that? If there are disruptions in your supply chain, how can you absorb that? Volatility, changes due to the market and external factors, how do you handle those as a business? Uncertainty. With uncertainty, to try to account for uncertainty, you need to try to spend money in gathering information and in sharing that information with decision makers, trying to make sure that if things are happening in a business at a mid to lower level management position, it gets, especially if it's something important, it gets communicated to the decision makers as quickly as possible, and they can make, it's all about making informed decisions, right? We also need to try to understand complexity within an organization and try to reduce it as much as possible if it doesn't have any significant benefits. This might mean restructuring the business and even collaboration within the business across organizational boundaries. Try to keep things as simple as possible within the business, the supply chains, the value chains, and everything with regards to risk management. And then ambiguity calls for experimentation and learning through small scale initiatives. So when we are talking about experimentation, we mean that like if a company is unsure about entering into a certain area of business, they might decide to launch a pilot, a small pilot launch of the product to see if demand is high, and then if it is, they can then launch the product full time. Like if there's ambiguity with regards to an area that the business is looking to go into. And also learning through iteration, whereby, for example, a tech company might use an initial version of a software product to gather feedback from individuals before they launch the product on a full scale. Small initiatives, a retail company might test a new store format in a few locations, maybe in one province, before launching it in all of the provinces, because there's a lot of uncertainty with regards to that. So that's the idea behind dealing with ambiguity in the risk management cases, right? So you see that if you just rely on traditional old-fashioned risk management approaches, we tend to get failures like the one at Barings Bank, HIH, Come, and Eskom. They often fail in VUCA environments where we've got volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. So organizations need to be more adaptive, need to come up with more resilient approaches, and acknowledge the limitations of prediction and emphasize what we call organizational agility. Okay. So thank you very much for listening. That brings us to an end of the first learning unit on the module. Lessons not learned. I hope it was a very helpful class. In the next lesson, I'm going to take you through enterprise risk management. There are a number of key learning outcomes here. Again, we'll look at a lot of important articles. We'll discuss those articles and go through the lesson. Then in the final class, we'll look at capital in enterprises. Right. That will be topic one. Any questions or queries with regards to anything covered in this class, please do feel free to let me know. I won't always be able to get back to you promptly, but I'll always try to do so as I can. Thank you very much and all the best with your studies.